Battle of Tumbleton explained. Why it changes House of the Dragon forever. Warning, spoiler warning. This video contains major House of the Dragon and Fire and Blood spoilers, including the Battle of Tumbleton, the Dragon Seeds, and major future events in the Dance of the Dragons. The Battle of Tumbleton isn't just another battle in the Dance of the Dragons. It is one of the moments that completely changes the direction of the war. Dragons turn against dragons. The Dragon Seeds betray Rhaenyra. The Green Army gains a massive advantage, and suddenly the war becomes even more unpredictable. But what actually happened at Tumbleton? Why was this battle so important? And how did it change the Dance of the Dragons forever? Let's break it down. 1. Why was Tumbleton so important? Tumbleton was strategically important because controlling the town meant controlling an important route through the Reach. The Greens needed it, the Blacks needed it, and both sides understood that losing Tumbleton could have major consequences for the war. The Green Army eventually arrives with Daeron Targaryen, riding Targaryen. But Daeron isn't the only important figure involved. The Greens also have two extremely valuable dragon seeds on their side, Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White. And this is where everything begins to change. 2. Who are the dragon seeds? The dragon seeds are people of Valyrian descent who attempt to claim dragons during Rhaenyra's desperate search for more riders. Among them are Hugh Hammer and Ulf. Hugh claims Vermithor, one of the largest and most powerful dragons alive. Ulf claims Silverwing. That gives Rhaenyra an enormous advantage. Suddenly, two common-born men have become dragonriders. But there's a problem. Rhaenyra can give them dragons, but she can't completely control their ambitions. And that's exactly what the Greens realize. 3. How do the Greens get Ulf and Hugh? The Green strategy is surprisingly simple. They offer the dragon seeds something Rhaenyra cannot easily provide: power, titles, land, gold, and noble status. For Hugh and Ulf, the promises are incredibly tempting. They went from being ordinary men to riding some of the most powerful creatures in the world. Now they're being offered a place among the nobility. And Ulf, especially, has already shown signs that he enjoys status and attention. The Greens understand his personality. They don't need to convince him that their cause is morally superior. They simply need to convince him that joining them will make him more powerful. 4. The battle begins. When the fighting starts, Tumbleton becomes chaos. The Green forces attack the town while the Black defenders try to hold their position. Daeron and Targaryen become crucial to the Green victory. But the real turning point comes when the dragon seeds change sides. Imagine the psychological impact. The Blacks aren't just fighting a Green army anymore. They're suddenly facing dragons that were supposed to be fighting for Rhaenyra. And this is why the dragon seeds are so important. The Dance has always been a war where dragons determine the balance of power. Now, the dragons themselves are changing sides. 5. Why Hugh Hammer is so dangerous. Hugh Hammer becomes one of the most powerful men on the battlefield. Riding Vermithor, he possesses enormous destructive power. And unlike many noble dragon riders, Hugh wasn't born into the royal family. He came from nothing. Now he has a dragon. He has influence, and he begins to believe that he deserves even more. This is where his ambition becomes dangerous. Hugh doesn't simply want to survive the war. He starts imagining a much bigger future for himself. And that ambition ultimately contributes to the chaos that follows. 6. What does Ulf do? Ulf is even more unpredictable. He's riding Silverwing, one of the most important dragons in the Dance. But Ulf isn't a disciplined military commander. He's arrogant. He drinks heavily. He enjoys his new status. And he doesn't have the same ideological commitment to Rhaenyra that the traditional Targaryen supporters have. The Greens recognize this weakness. Once Ulf changes sides, the Blacks lose one of their greatest assets. And that betrayal becomes one of the defining moments of Tumbleton. 7. Why Tumbleton changes the war. This is where the battle becomes much bigger than Tumbleton itself. The Greens have gained dragons, the Blacks have lost trust in the dragon seeds, and Rhaenyra's ability to control the situation begins to weaken. The war becomes increasingly chaotic. There are no longer clear rules. People are changing sides. Dragonriders are betraying their allies, and commanders are beginning to realize that political loyalty can disappear the moment someone is offered enough power. Tumbleton proves something terrifying. The dance isn't just a war between two factions anymore. It's becoming a war where everyone is fighting for themselves. 8. The Dragon Battle. One of the most important aspects of Tumbleton is the involvement of multiple dragons. Targaryen becomes heavily involved in the fighting. Vermithor is there, and the sheer presence of these dragons transforms the battlefield. For ordinary soldiers, there is almost nothing they can do. Entire sections of the battlefield can be destroyed in moments. This is also why Tumbleton becomes one of the most devastating examples of what happens when too many dragons are brought into a human war. The Targaryens may believe dragons give them control, but dragons also make the war impossible to control. 9. The first battle leads to something worse. The first battle of Tumbleton is only the beginning. The Green victory creates a completely new problem. Hugh and Ulf now have enormous power, and they're not necessarily interested in behaving like traditional knights. They begin abusing the power they've gained. The situation inside Tumbleton becomes increasingly chaotic. Instead of acting like disciplined conquerors, parts of the Green Army begin looting and committing atrocities. And this is one of the reasons Tumbleton becomes so infamous. Victory doesn't bring peace, it brings more chaos. 10. The Two Betrayers. This is where Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White earn their infamous nickname. They become known as the Two Betrayers. Their betrayal isn't just important because they change sides. It's important because they demonstrate how unstable Rhaenyra's dragon seed strategy really was. Rhaenyra needed dragonriders, but by giving powerful dragons to ambitious outsiders, she also created people with enough power to challenge the political order itself. And once Hugh and Ulf realize how powerful they have become, their ambitions grow. That becomes a serious problem for everyone. 11. What happens to the Blacks? The defeat at Tumbleton is devastating for Rhaenyra. Her forces lose ground. Her reputation suffers. And the idea that she can control the war begins to look increasingly unrealistic. Remember, Rhaenyra's biggest advantage has always been the number of dragons supporting her. But Tumbleton proves that having dragons isn't enough. You also need people you can trust. And that's something Rhaenyra is rapidly losing. 12. Why Tumbleton matters for Daeron. Tumbleton also becomes an important part of Daeron Targaryen's story. Daeron is still young compared with many of the other major players in the dance. But with Targaryen, he becomes one of the Green's most important military figures. Tumbleton gives Daeron a reputation as a warrior. However, the victory also exposes him to the darker side of the war. Winning the battle doesn't mean everything goes well. The aftermath becomes increasingly brutal, and Daeron's association with Tumbleton will follow him through the rest of the conflict. Final thoughts. So why does the Battle of Tumbleton change House of the Dragon forever? Because it destroys the idea that the dance is simply black versus green. After Tumbleton, the war becomes much more complicated. The dragon seeds have proven that loyalty can be bought. Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White become powerful enough to change the balance of the war. Daeron and Targaryen emerge as major green forces. And Rhaenyra's greatest advantage begins turning into one of her biggest problems. The battle also reveals the terrifying reality of the dance. Dragons don't create peace, they create chaos. And when people who were never supposed to have that kind of power suddenly gain control of dragons, The consequences can be catastrophic. That's why Tumbleton isn't just another battle. It's one of the moments that pushes the Dance of the Dragons toward its darkest phase. And if House of the Dragon follows the broad events of Fire and Blood, Tumbleton could become one of the most important and devastating storylines of the entire series. The biggest question now is, will HBO show the two betrayers exactly as they appear in the book? Will Hugh Hammer and Oath the White become the same terrifying figures? And how much will the show change the fate of Daeron Targaryen and the other dragons involved? Because after Tumbleton, there is no going back.